So, who does actually want to take the job, and what will it take to succeed in this crucial position? Who better to ask than a former national security advisor himself? I'm joined now by retired General Jim Jones. He served in that role during the Obama administration. General Jones, thanks very much for joining us. There was a report this week that you are being considered for the position of national security advisor under President Trump. Have you had contacts with the Trump White House, and is it a position you would consider?
No, I have not had any contact with the White House, and I think that I've had my tour in the barrel, but I'd be very happy to offer any advice to anybody to the person that does take the job, because it's so very important.
Well, President Trump is meeting with some possible candidates this weekend. I'll just run through them for our viewers. You may know John Bolton. He's the former UN ambassador. General H.R. McMaster, experienced military commander. The former Lieutenant General Robert Caslen, as well as the acting national security advisor Keith Kellogg. From your experience knowing these people, who might work best in a Trump administration?
Well, I don't want to handicap that race by picking a candidate, but I will tell you that all four seem to have the requisite qualifications, and that is to be steeped in geopolitics, to be a strategic thinker, and to be able to coordinate the interagency in such a way that it can be most useful to the president. The national security is not the province of any one department anymore. It's several agencies that have to sit at the table to discuss the important issues that are of our time. So it's got to be someone who is a strategic thinker. It's got to be someone who understands that the strategic coordination of the interagency is very important. And above all, I think someone who can resist and cause the NSC to resist getting involved in the tactical operations of our efforts around the world.
Let me ask you this, because beyond qualifications, it's our reporting that one reason Vice Admiral Bob Harward turned down the job this week is that it wasn't clear to him what the chain of command was. He wanted a direct line to the president. There are some questions about the role that Steve Bannon plays in the White House. How crucial is it for a national security advisor to be, in effect, in charge of these issues, have a direct line to the president, have his own staff, his or her own staff? How important is that to being successful in this job?
I think it's very important. The National Security Advisor sits as the chairman of one of the four committees, the Principals Committee, one of the four committees that keys up the issues just before the full NSC, where the president is present. So the National Security Advisor has to have direct access to the president. Obviously, you keep the appropriate people informed, the vice president, the chief of staff, and so on and so forth. But that relationship has got to be very strong and very direct. And I also think the National Security Advisor has to have the confidence of the cabinet members and has to be fully aware of what their views are on each of the important subjects that are being discussed. So access and confidence, trust and confidence on the part of the president for that National Security Advisor is absolutely key.
I want to turn now to the deployment of
By
U.S.
the way, there's a whole community of national security advisors around the world.
I want to turn now to the deployment of U.S. forces abroad, arguably.
There's a whole community of national.
Sorry, General, we have a bit of a delay there. It makes it difficult to have quick back and forth. But I do, before we run out of time, want to turn to the question of the deployment of U.S. forces abroad, arguably no greater decision that a national security advisor would have been involved in, or a president. It's our CNN, my colleague Barbara Starr's reporting that the Pentagon may recommend to the president the deployment of conventional ground forces in northern Syria beyond just the small groups of special operators that are there now. Would you recommend sending those additional troops in numbers into that fight now?
Well, I would have to know a lot more than I do about what the mission would be and what exactly the forces would do. But I do believe that since the failure to enforce the red line back in the previous administration, that was a colossal mistake from a strategic standpoint. And I have been advocating that the Pentagon dust-off Operation Provide Comfort in 1991, which was a Kurdish relief operation where we also handled refugees, and we established no-fly zones, no-go zones. And I think at the very least, the penalty to Bashar Assad for having used chemical weapons on his own people should have been to forfeit a piece of his territory for where refugees could have been handled, and it might have prevented the flow of refugees into into Europe. So I think it depends on what the mission is and what that force does. And but I think I'm sure the Pentagon's hard at work at it, and I'm anxious to see what they come up with.
Do you blame General Jones, President Obama, for the degree of the current refugee crisis from Syria?
No, I don't blame him. I think it was a mistake to draw a red line on a certain issue and then fail to follow up on it in any meaningful way. And I think that caused a lot of loss of confidence in the will and of the United States in this very important part of the world. I know of no part of the world that it's more important from a security standpoint to us and to our friends in Europe and by indirectly to the NATO alliance.
General Jim Jones, thanks very much for joining us from Germany.